Thank you for all coming today. My name is Rhonda Hoffman. I'm a genealogy specialist in the Grosvenor Room at the Central Library in downtown Buffalo. Today's class is Government Secrets Revealed, County Supervisors Proceedings. So today we're going to talk about what are county supervisors proceedings, what might they tell you about your ancestor, and how you access them. Until the 1930s, in New York State, outside of New York City, every county had a board of supervisors. A board of supervisors is made up of town and city supervisors within a county. They met at least once per year. And because many town representatives were farmers, they would usually meet for several days in the fall after harvest until their business was complete. Special sessions were held if an important matter came up outside of their selected meeting timeframe. I think of this doodle found in the 1830 Erie County Supervisors Proceedings as depicting the range of representatives that you might have seen in the early days. The top drawing is perhaps a more affluent resident or a city dweller, and the bottom drawing an average farmer, laborer, or country dweller. Perhaps this is also an indication of how riveting the artist thought the meetings were. Though the meetings may have been dry in person, I hope that I can illustrate today how proceedings can illuminate your family's history. Substantial changes happened to some New York County governments beginning in 1936. So as a result of these changes, county government legislative bodies may nowadays be called Board of Supervisors, Board of Representatives, Board of Legislators, or county legislature. Supervisors' proceedings record actions taken by the board and reports given to the board by committees, institutions, and county government departments. Proceedings in book format can be found by the mid-1800s, and they were sometimes published in local newspapers. Handwritten proceedings may be seen as early as a county's formation. Their main concerns were financial responsibility, carrying out local New York and New York State directives, monitoring county property and institutions, and recording county law. A major financial responsibility for counties were county poorhouses, also called an almshouse. And an almshouse is an institution where they take in the poor who can't afford to live on their own. And also they may have provided money if people needed a little temporary help. Poorhouses also cared for the sick and may have had a hospital on site. So many people went there for health care. The poorhouse records detailed in supervisors' proceedings may be so detailed that they may help you recreate those who lived in a poorhouse. So here we can see an example from 1882 from Genesee County, and you can see the individuals listed here and how many days that they were in the home and what the cost was associated with keeping those people in the home. County poorhouses often took children in, and sometimes children were sent to other institutions, and that might be listed in the proceeding. So you might find out a different, like an orphanage where one of your ancestors went to. And in this example, we see that George Moran there was cash paid to the Ontario Orphan Asylum for the board and care of him for almost a year, from September 4th, 1881 to July 4th, 1882. And a little bit lower, we see that there were expenses in removing George to Kansas. So what a great lead. You may also find listings of placement in orphanages. And usually a child would have been placed in a nearby orphanage, but sometimes they would have had to go a little bit farther. This is from the 1922 Chautauqua County proceedings. And there's the Western New York Society for the Protection of Homeless and Dependent Children in Randolph, which is in Cattaraugus County, right next door to them. And then at the Gary homes in Gary, New York, you can see each of the children are listed, and by whom committed is also listed. And usually the children placed, the person committing them would have been the superintendent of the poor, and both Ms. J.W. or G.W. Colgrove and Oscar Palm were superintendents of the poor for Chautauqua County. And sometimes it might be an individual who ran some sort of charity, and that pertains to Miss Crosby. Sometimes children might have been placed a little bit farther away or in a special home, which they may have been placed due to their ethnicity, which we see Rose Mosby at the top. She was placed in the Dorsey home for dependent, what they call colored children. So she was likely African American. That's in Brighton, New York. People might have been placed based on their need. So we see the second listing at the New York State School for the Blind in Batavia. And in this example, the two children listed, you see who committed them. We have people with the same last name as them, and these are their parents. So Marie is Fritz's mom, and Tony is James's father. And sometimes children were placed having to do with their religion. So we can see a number of children were sent to the Jewish orphan home in Rochester. This is a very detailed example from Albany County. At the top of this listing, we see it states, in compliance with Section 8, Chapter 354, Laws of 1884, I herewith transmit my report of the orphan and destitute children received and committed at Fairview Home in West Troy, New York. So this is actually a state law that was made specific to Albany County that required the keeping of these detailed records. The records are a few pages long. So this is the first page. Let's look a little more closely. So if we look at the first listing, we see John Kennedy, who was 6 years old, male, white, and his nationality is the US. We see the name of the overseer of the poor, when they were committed. So we have a specific date and to what home. It's the Fairview home, and that home is located in Watervliet. This is the next page where we're going to see some more detail. We see the last residence of the child here. John Kennedy lived in the village of West Troy, and his exact address was 313 Broadway. The name of person with whom the child last resided. Here we have Matilda Kennedy. Oftentimes you're going to see someone with the same surname as the child, so likely a family member. Towards the bottom, the Ottoman children, there's a Mrs. Garland and a Mrs. Leota. So this could be a foster care or a particular orphanage that they might have been staying at, and these ladies might have worked there. We've got the nationality of the parents here. John Kennedy's are both from Ireland. This is the last page. And John's father and mother are still living, and the occupation of the father is listed. A number of the children, simply have that their father was a laborer, but we do see some specifics. And then there is reason why a charge on the county. So why is the county going to be paying for this child? And we've got deserted by the father, and the mother is sick. So that's why he was placed in this orphanage. Oftentimes you're going to see that a parent might have passed away and the other parent, couldn't care for them for some reason. You can see a number of mothers are deceased and the fathers are destitute or ill. And then the length of residence in the county. This can be a little confusing. You see, some of these children, it says 28 years. And what this is who had to pay for people in institutions that was dependent on how long that person lived in a particular town or county. So for children, that would have been based on their father usually. If the father was deceased, then the mother. So this 9 years was likely, that's how long the father or possibly the mother, since he might have deserted the family, lived in the county. I would say this is a more rare find, but sometimes you do see listings associated with foster homes. This is from Chautauqua County in 1922. And here we see different, it's just people who did foster children. And while we don't see the children's names here, if you have trouble finding children in census records and you know that they might have been in a foster care situation, this could help you find them by looking up the individuals who took in fosters for this particular county. I just wanted to draw your attention to Mrs. Mildred Nelson of Fredonia, because we're going to see a little bit more about her later. This is another listing associated with foster homes. These are actual children that are in foster homes. And this is a report of the Chautauqua County Agency for Dependent Children. So if there was a report by an institution, then the institution would have received some sort of funds from the county, and that's why they would have to give these reports to the county. So this is a record regarding the boarding out of children in private homes and what town had to pay for that boarding. So taking into consideration the last couple of slides, I wanted to see, I looked up that Mildred Nelson to see if she took in any fosters in the 1920 census. And we have her in the town of Pomfret with her husband, Arlo. And you can see that she has a number of boarders with her, and they're all children 16 or younger. And then there is her mother-in-law as well as an elderly boarder. And 3 of the children that were listed on the last slide, Harold Buckles, Harry Reinhardt, and Silva Rayner, they're living with her in 1920. You can often find details for social history in the supervisor's proceedings. And this is a report having to do with a home. And it says, with the exception of a few children who have been admitted recently and the mentally defective girls, all attend public schools in Fredonia. Pupils in the upper grade at school have manual training as a part of the school program, woodworking for the boys and sewing and cooking for the girls. And the older children help with routine work of the institution and are regarded by the administration as receiving practical training in this way. Duties are said to be charged about once a month. The inspector feels that some of the older children may be overworked. There is a recreation period for all after supper, and some of the children, especially the girls in a younger group, have a greater part of the afternoon. And children apparently have much freedom in recreation hours and spend this time on the grounds in the house according to the weather and their individual inclinations. Books, magazines are sent by friends, and playthings and quiet games are provided for indoor play, and a croquet set, baseball equipment, teeter, and swing for outdoor play. It was stated that Mr. Nelson and the older boys are planning to make additional equipment for the playgrounds. So we see that name Nelson again. And so this is the Nelsons run what is called the Chautauqua County Detention Home for Children. So we get an idea of what those children's lives were like. Sometimes we do see some more difficult experiences that our ancestors might have had. And this is on that same home. It says the most common means of discipline are said to be reproof by Mr. and Mrs. Nelson, deprivation of the privilege of an outing, and confinement in the locker. The locker, a small room with a heavily screened window on the second floor, is used for children who fail to respond to other punishments or run away. It's said to be used chiefly for boys, and the period of confinement is from 1 to 3 days. Corporal punishment is also used. This takes the form of strikes with a rubber hose. No record of punishment is kept, and they're recommending that a record should be kept of all locker and corporal punishments, showing the date, name of child, and offense, and the witness to the punishment. This is an example from Onondaga County from 1884. This is for a place called the House of Providence. And it was a home that had young boys, as well as at one time it was a home for the elderly. And it says that 9 assistants helped Sister Magdalene in the care of 84 boys whose ages range from 2 to 14 years. And these teachers not only teach and care for the children, but they have charge of making these little ones all in the clothes they wear. Their wardrobe is made entirely under her own supervision, and each boy had a suit of blue flannel and one light mixed suit, together with an overcoat made from old clothes sent in by friends, and so constructed as to be unable to detect the number of pieces which is necessary to cutting up for the making of the garments. Together with these 84 children, these sisters have the care of 24 old ladies that seem perfectly happy. So we can kind of just picture what an ancestor might have looked like in their blue flannel shoes, or the coats that were made for them. Sometimes individuals that needed special care may have been placed out. This could be, we talked about children being placed in orphanages, but they individuals needing care, even adults, might have been placed in other institutions. For example, someone who was living with mental illness. So a number of individuals from Onondaga County were put in what was called the New York State Lunatic Asylum in Utica, New York. We can see all of their names and the date that they were admitted. Unwed mothers frequently sought assistance and medical care from the poorhouse. This is an example for a lady named Emma Tiffault. She is a resident of the town of Milton in Saratoga County. This is from 1890. And it says in February of 1890, she was delivered of a bastard child in the town, and Maglore Mason incurred an expense of $47 in the care and maintenance of Emma during her confinement and sickness. The father of said child settled with the superintendents of the poor of Saratoga County for the care and maintenance of said child and for the care and maintenance of Emma during such confinement and sickness. So I wondered if it did say, it mentions the father and that he had to make a payment. I wondered if I could maybe find out the father's name in these proceedings. And I was, in fact, able to do that. So I found numerous listings that seemed to be associated with this case. And these I thought were had the most connection and were the most revealing. They were in different sections, different departments of the county. The first one, February 1st, 1890, there was a listing in the constable's accounts, a charge for subpoenaing witnesses in the bastardy case of Tiffault versus Palmer. The specific charges were detailed. So now it appears we have a surname of the father, the birth father. And then there were a few different listings for the superintendents of the poor. February 4th one-day charge for the Palmer Tiefel, a bastard case. And I thought that could perhaps be a phonetic spelling of Tiffel. And then there was another charge for Tiefel Palmer bastard case. And then one day in Ballston in March for arranging the compromise and discharge of an Isaac Palmer, followed quickly by December 19th, 1890, a case called People versus Isaac Palmer for bastardy in the justice's accounts. So, of course, court documents should be sought out to confirm this, but I think this provides a great lead for the child's birth father or a record substitute in the case that court records did not survive. Poorhouse deaths were often listed. If we zoom in here, this is 1892 for Erie County. So we see a couple of individuals on October 3rd, John Peterson, 70 years old. He was born in Sweden. He died of chronic bronchitis and he was under treatment for 22 days. At one time, New York State poor law required counties to pay for headstones for the military poor. This is from the 1884 Onondaga County proceedings. And in these cases, we'll often see a list of soldiers, their military unit, and occasionally a place of burial. The first few listings here, for example, Alfred Shute of Company H in the 149th New York State Volunteers Regiment. He was buried upon the lot owned by route post number 161 of the GAR, Grand Army Republic in Oakwood. Coroner reports were frequently provided in proceedings are an excellent substitute for death records before New York laws for recording deaths were fully complied with. You should know that autopsies were not performed on all of those who passed away. They were performed for unexpected and unattended deaths, such as accidents, deaths of those who were healthy, homicides, and suicides. So they can be sensitive in nature. This is from a 1900 Albany County report. And we see, for example, John I. Johnson of Waterford, New York, was killed by cars at Green Island on April 25th in 1900. Killed by cars for this time period would have meant railroad cars. We have some coroner reports in the Grosvenor room for the late 1800s and early 1900s. And I have to say, I have a whole new respect for railroad workers. There were so many accidents that occurred associated with railroads. This particular coroner was very detailed in his reports, and I would say this is not a usual case. Normally you don't see this, but this particular coroner actually made a list of coroner inquests that were unnecessary. So these deaths that are listed here were brought to his attention, but it was deemed that a report was not necessary for that particular individual. Some coroner reports will list the items that were on the deceased when they passed away. This is from 1893 from Erie County. This listing, Peter Rast passed away on November 28th, 1892. He had one silver watch and chain, one passbook, a Globe Savings and AIDS Society, and delivered to Matthias Goldeit, his brother-in-law. So they would tell who received these items, you know, once they got in touch with family members or people associated with the deceased. So we could have just learned Peter Rast's wife's maiden name, if Matthias Goldeit was his wife's brother, or perhaps a sister's married name. Down at the bottom, we see a Henry C. Pease passed away, and $4 in cash was delivered to Hiram T. Pease, his son. So we can make family connections this way. Criminal records may be in supervisors' proceedings. They're especially a good place to look, if your ancestor committed a crime that wouldn't have warranted a headline. And there are a few different county departments which may list information on crimes. One of them would be the county jail, or it may have been called a penitentiary. So we might see these annual jail reports. This is from 1877 from Genesee County, where we're going to see the names of the prisoners. Down towards the bottom, we see the date of the person was committed and discharged, the number of days that they were in the jail, by whom committed, and also we will see the different crime, the crime that they committed. We'll often see inmate deaths as well. So oftentimes in these, you see a lot of individuals died of alcoholism. But here, for example, we see February 27th in 1899, Fred Williams. COL in parentheses means what they called colored, which is probably African American. He was 19 years old, from the US, and he died of tubercular peritonitis. You might find social history associated with penitentiaries as well. Oftentimes inspections were made periodically of the penitentiaries. Here this particular report from Albany County in 1875 talks about the work that the prisoners do. So the principal work carried out at the penitentiary during this year has been shoemaking under contracts with parties in the city of New York. A few of the male convicts and most of the females have been employed in caning and finishing chair seats and backs. Accepting these and the number required for baking, cooking, washing, and ironing, and for the necessary work about the buildings and grounds, all able-bodied prisoners for whom work could be procured were employed in shoe shops. This is from a county treasurer report. This is a very early example, a 1796 report that had been handwritten, was republished in a later report for Westchester County. And we see a number of payments made to Gilbert Dean, and it lists him with, they call him Gaoler. This is just an antiquated term, spelling of the word jailer, and you actually just pronounce it jailer. It says he was paid $8.15 for victualling Harry Cannard in the jail 14 weeks and 4 days at 12 cents a week. And victualling means that he would have provided him with food and other provisions. In this list, we even see an enslaved person listed. So Dean victualed Nicholas Clinton, who they list as a slave for 12 weeks and 5 days. Sometimes sheriff reports will list fines and who paid them and the charge. So here we see the top case on March 12th in 1900. This is Cattaraugus County, People versus William A. Starks Jr., and he was charged with petty larceny, and he had a fine of $75. There were often, it was very frequently to see charges associated with sheriffs transporting prisoners. At the very bottom here, we see on February 14th in 1902, this is Erie County, Joseph Supowski and 2 officers transported him to Matawan. And sometimes, if you look at these listings and you'll see a lot of times there'll just be one officer with someone. And if you see multiple officers, there may have been a reason for that. It might have been someone who was a little harder to take charge of. And Matawan was a state hospital for the criminally insane. And I could research this individual, and Joseph, there were articles that were stated that he burned a building that he owned and killed a family in that building. This one is a very detailed, this is from a sheriff expense report. And we find a kind of a detailed gem. In this example, Deputy Sheriff Bartu received compensation for 9 days services and disbursements for himself and a horse and buggy in following Fred Fry, a horse thief from Marilla in Erie County, through Erie, Genesee, and Wyoming counties, arresting Fry, bringing him back to a justice of Marilla, who held Fry for grand jury, delivering him to Erie County Jail, and thereafter recovering the property that was stolen, a horse, buggy, and harness at Orangeville in Wyoming County. So they had to chase him through 3 counties. That would be a great story to tell your family. District attorney reports often list indictments. This is from Erie County in 1902, and there were quite a few indictments. At the top, we see Joseph Kelly was indicted for forgery in the 3rd degree, and his case was dismissed. The other 2 gentlemen, for example, Thomas Kelly, he was indicted for assault in the 2nd degree, and he was convicted. This is a rare find. This is a probation officer's report from 1920 in Chautauqua County, but we see great detail. The full names aren't given, but the top one lists an FB burglar who committed a very serious crime in Dunkirk. And it says that he has found steady works in Forks, New York after probation. He stuck to his job for several months and then enlisted in the Navy, saying that he desired to take advantage of one of the educational courses that the Navy offers. It says a little comment from the probation officer that it seemed more probable, however, that he felt the lust for loot and the man desired to place himself out of danger of temptation. And then the next listing, it's just listed as CB, but it says he was involved with the last man in the burglary and had a wife and 4 children. He returned to his employment with General Electric at Erie, has reported regularly each week, and has earned from $42 to $65 a week ever since, and his family approves of his probation. Sometimes you'll see contracts with different organizations with the county, especially for penitentiaries. So if a particular county didn't have a penitentiary, they may have had a contract with another nearby institution. This is a contract between Orleans County and the Monroe County Penitentiary. And essentially, Monroe County was to take in any person who was not deemed idiotic, insane, crippled, or incapacitated for labor from age, sickness, or any other cause. And it gives the time frame that they would have been sentenced for by any court in the county of County of Orleans in New York State, and that they would be confined to hard labor in the Monroe County Penitentiary for no less than 60 days. The supervisor's proceedings often give examples where it helps you locate your ancestor in time and place. They can often be thought of as a substitute for city directories, especially the grand jury lists. This was a frequent find where counties would list grand jurors who were selected for each year by town. So this is 1890 from Cattaraugus County. So this is the town of Allegheny, the town of Ashford, and we see the grand jurors named, and then we have their profession listed as well. Accounts audited can be found even in the earliest proceedings. This is an original 1830 proceedings from Erie County, and it lists accounts paid to individuals by the town of Aurora. So for Aurora in 1832, and these individuals would have provided goods or services to the town. The listings don't necessarily mean that these individuals lived in the named town, but they would have likely lived in the vicinity. Sometimes the different accounts might list the specific goods or services that were provided. This is from the district attorney's accounts, and you can see that a number of individuals were paid to be an expert witness. Someone provided auto service. There were some photographers as well. Sometimes you will see different tax lists. This is from 1903 for Greene County, an erroneous assessment and illegal taxation. So these individuals named, and it tells the town where they live or own property. And they're claiming they are owed a refund because they were assessed wrong or weren't supposed to pay certain taxes at all. I've also seen school tax lists in these. Every time I look in a different supervisor's proceedings, I find something I haven't seen before. So here's a few more examples that I thought were interesting. This is a list of people receiving financial assistance. This is Genesee County in 1920. The name of the beneficiaries, these are all women, and it tells how long they received assistance and at how much per month, and then the total of assistance that they received. I searched in the census record, and I found that all of these were single females that were, well, I should say either single or widowed women who had one or more children. You'll often see election results listed, and it'll go town by town and list all of the different candidates. So you can see what office the individuals ran for, and it'll tell you how many votes. So if your ancestor ran for government, you can see how many votes they received, or maybe you just want to see the political leanings of the town where your ancestor lived. If your ancestor was associated with the Board of Supervisors in the year of their death, you'll often find a detailed obituary, which occasionally includes a photo. The 1893 Erie County proceedings had lists from several towns related to a New York State military law. This is part of a list of over 500 people from the town of Hamburg. And these individuals were owed money related to Civil War service of drafted men, or for men who were drafted who paid for substitutes for themselves. And the money owed to them, including interest, is listed. The individuals who are listed here may be the soldiers if they were still living, or their heirs if the soldier was deceased. And I found these for multiple other Erie County towns as well. Oftentimes you will see local and state laws were published in supervisors' proceedings, and they might include some interesting detail. This is from Albany in 1900. It's an act in relation to the management of the Albany Penitentiary. And it mainly lays out the responsibilities of managing the penitentiary. For example, it it tells that the Penitentiary Commission appoints a superintendent for a 5-year term, and that committee determines the number of employees who should be selected by the superintendent, their duties and their salaries. And then the commission is to report annually to the Board of Supervisors, and a list of salaries for each employees and their names should be given. Detailed receipts and payments, including their purpose, should be given. The cost of maintaining each prisoner, the number of prisoners for every day in the prison for tabular format, and the condition of the penitentiary should be reported on. So it's great to know that, you know, this background information for proof that certain records were kept, although it's possible a county may not have retained those records or have a quick means of locating those records. If you're interested in reading New York laws that might detail record keeping, there's this blog, The Advancing Genealogist, and they link to historic New York State statutes. There are historic supervisors manuals that you could also seek out. Several companies published law guides for local governments, which summarized county and municipal legal responsibilities. Different laws may have been in place based on the size of the county. Different laws might be different for different counties. And a way to find these is the HathiTrust website. And usually what I'll search for, I'll do a catalog search. So you want to change your radio dial to catalog. And I would put in Supervisor Manual New York. And then you'll get hits for different years. And usually there'll be sections on, say, the Board of Supervisors, relief of the poor, related to jurors, schools, taxation, jails and prisoners, and county hospitals. You might be wondering what the difference is between published and original supervisors, the original handwritten records. And I did just a brief examination of some of the Erie County records. And I found that the published records are not an exact transcription of the handwritten records. There were often formatting changes, like headings were provided that weren't in the handwritten proceedings, and there was punctuation added. Oftentimes this helped in the readability and in understanding the proceedings. Sometimes you'll see minor wording changes, which usually helped in understanding the proceedings, but sometimes given names were not published, or maybe just first initials were used in the published version. So if you go back to those handwritten proceedings, you might see the given names. And then occasionally more information was published than was included in the original records. So sometimes the original records would not have, say, a list of accounts that were paid, but the published version, they decided to put that in the published version. So how do you find your ancestors and proceedings? They're laid out, proceedings are laid out in order by date. So usually you'll find a volume, a particular year in a volume, and very prominently on top of the individual sessions, you'll see where they met and the date of the particular section of the proceedings. There will be an index either in the front or back of the book. Unfortunately, these aren't an every name index, but you will see different categories. So here you can see, you know, coroners and constables, district attorney, all those things that I talked about. So you want to peruse the headings to see where you think your ancestor might have fit in and then browse them. A good category to look for is look under the word report as the main subject heading, or annual report. And that's where you see a lot of those nice long lists that I showed you. So here you can see, like, here's a coroner report, a surrogate report, things associated with school taxes. That's where you're going to find those great name lists often. There is online access to many supervisors' proceedings. Again, I usually like to use HathiTrust. And what I'll do, what I recommend, instead of just searching all of the millions of books in HathiTrust, first I'll like to see if the county I'm interested in is even in HathiTrust. And this is their main search screen. I'll click on catalog and I'll put in the name of the county and the word proceedings, and then I'll put supervisor with an asterisk, just in case it was spelled with an apostrophe S or plural just with an S. It'll catch all of those search terms. And remember that county governments changed, some of them after 1936. So you might have to substitute words. Instead of Board of Supervisors, you may need to substitute the word legislator, representative, or instead of Board of Supervisors, county legislature, when you're doing your searching, if you're looking for later years. I would say these are usually online, whatever is in public domain. So right now, that's through the year 1927. You can often find them through that time frame. And sometimes you'll see some more recent ones than that online. So after you get your search terms and you choose catalog, you just click the search button. And you'll see a record, and you just click where it says catalog record. And you'll see the listings of different years. You can see the institution that digitized these items. You just click the year range that you're interested in. These are often in groupings, not year by year. Once you're in a particular grouping, if you click jump to section, you can usually easily identify the index. So then you can click on the index. And then you can start browsing those headings to see, where you think your ancestor might fall in. And I like that HathiTrust, when they scan, they have the image number and then they have the page number in parentheses. So you can find whatever page you're interested in here and then easily just scroll through the document to find the right page number. Of course, you can keyword search an individual item. So if you've clicked in a particular year or group of years, just try your ancestor's name in there, try a first name and a last name. If you don't have luck, try just the last name. Or if your ancestor has a very unique first name, you could even try first name. I tried for my, one of my grandma's first name is Viola, or my great grandma, I should say, his first name is Viola. And I knew that she was in an orphanage, and I found a listing for her that way. You can search all of the online proceedings for a particular county. And what I would do for that is from the main search screen, go to advanced full text search. And then what I would do is for one of the sections, do a full text search for all fields, all of these words, put in your ancestor's first and last name, choose and then the particular supervisor's proceedings. So the county name and then supervisor's proceedings for title and all of these words. And then just click the advanced search button. And that way you can search across all of those proceedings for that particular county. If you like to look through print books instead, a lot of places might have in-person access. I call these places the usual suspects. So, county clerks will often have these, county historians' offices, public libraries, colleges and universities, genealogical and historical societies. They'll often have them for their particular county where they're located. There are some significant statewide collections at a few larger institutions. Cornell University has a large collection, New York Public Library, the New York State Library, and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign all have large collections of these. And access, these are often things that might be kept off-site or in storage. Oftentimes there aren't high demand for these, so you'll want to contact these institutions if you are going for a visit to find out if you need to have these retrieved in advance. So I hope I've inspired you to dig into Supervisors Proceedings. The handout will have my contact information, but if you have any questions that you think of afterwards, feel free to email me. You could also call the library and ask for the Grosvenor room, and I'd be happy to chat with you. I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen sharing. And I'm gonna check out the chat box to see if there's any questions. Let's see here. I'm gonna just stop the recording.